Westerns are one of the greatest contributions America has made to the film industry. Movies like Stagecoach, Tom Horn, Fort Apache, Pale Rider, Tombstone, these are films that left a lasting impression on movie fans for ages. And Western television shows like Gunsmoke, Bonanza, and The Rifleman, they've been watched by many generations. When you think of these heroes from these classics, you immediately think about the powerful guns they used. Colt, Winchester, Springfield. These are brands made famous around the world because of actors like John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, Glenn Ford. For generations, these men and the guns they carried have embodied the Western hero, from the classic Colt six-shooter to the modified tricks of the Hollywood trade. The guns used by movie heroes and villains are as much a part of the Western as the sweeping vistas and epic stories. Howdy, I'm Buck Taylor, and today we're going to take a look at one of the finest collections of movie guns in the world. These guns were used by legendary Western stars in some of the most remembered Westerns ever. We're here at my friend Al Frisch's ranch to take a look at his great collection. So let's take a look. These are my compadres, Al Frisch, Phil Spangenberger.
Hey, Buck.
Al Frisch is a Western movie producer and the owner of this great collection of firearms. Phil Spangenberger is a leading Western historian and authority on Western weaponry. Al, this is a mighty big rifle you got here. Looks like an 1876 that Steve McQueen might have used with Tom Horn.
You bet.
What do they call this sight?
That's a tang sight.
Tang sight. Remember how he adjusted it and all that before he took one of them long-range shots? Man. So listen, Phil, you're the historian. Didn't you tell me once that Tom Horn actually used a Model 94?
Yeah, in the era depicted in the film, in real life, Tom Horn used an 1894 Winchester. Mm-hmm. It was the state-of-the-art technology of a lever-action rifle at the time, smokeless powder, flat shooting, high velocity cartridge.
Wow. Folks, have you heard the expression movie magic? Well, it also applies to guns and props as well. What you see is not always real. Phil, you were telling me some of the tricks that the movie makers played in the movie Tom Horn.
Now, Buck, you remember in the film where Steve McQueen chases the rustlers on horseback. In those shots, because the 1876 is such a big, heavy rifle, the filmmakers decided to use a 73 Winchester, which is lighter, much easier to handle, and worked just as well. In the long shots, it's virtually indistinguishable from the big, heavy 1876 and much easier to use for both the star and the stunt double.
Phil, back to this gun. What kind of cartridges or bullets did this thing digest?
Well, the 76 Winchester, one of the calibers for that was a 45-60, but they found that a 45-70 blank would chamber perfectly.
And make a lot of smoke out of the
A lot
black.
of smoke, big muzzle flash, looked like a big bore black powder gun going off, which it was.
Fantastic. Listen, when I pass this table, I got to ask you some questions. You know how I like guns. Al, Phil, I appreciate you guys in Vengeance Trail. You used a lot of different type of weaponry, and that's what I like to do. I know in Tombstone, I had a choice because we didn't know what kind of a gun Turkey Creek Jack Johnson used. So I opted to use this Remington 4440, which is an unusual looking gun and certainly one you don't see a lot of. And I was real fond of it. And then my favorite, though, is this Merlin & Hobart, which is a real unique kind of a firearm. The way it opens and everything is different.
Beautiful machining.
I know, it's fantastic. I used it in the Rough Riders. I used it robbing stagecoaches, and then I used it going up San Juan Hill. Teddy Roosevelt let me use it there. I died of yellow fever. Randy Quaid also used it in the Long Riders. Now, I don't have to tell the John Wayne fans about this taffy colored gripped 45. I'll bet John Wayne used this in in a dozen or more of his films.
Well, you know, we know from Stembridge records that that gun was used by the Duke in Rio Lobo and Big Jake. It's the classic John Wayne Colt single action with the yellowed ivory grips as used by the Duke in so many of his films from the late 1950s on up to just before his last film. As a matter of fact, John Wayne bequeathed his personal Colt single action, which this is a spitting image of, to the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City.
Wow. John Wayne actually used this gun. I like that. Phil, you mentioned Stembridge Gun Rentals. The Stembridge Gun Rental Prop House was started at Paramount Studios in 1926. It was only one of two places where guns were rented for the movies at that time, with Stembridge renting solely firearms and related gear. Many famous stars used Stembridge-owned guns, including William Holden, James Arness, Chuck Connors, Sophia Loren, Mitzi Gaynor, and Charlton Heston. In their desk drawer, they had a guest book with the signature of every major Western movie star in Hollywood. So I think it's safe to say all the major Western movie stars use Stembridge guns.
You're right, Buck. Fortunately, Stembridge kept pretty good records for the last 50 or 60 years. Their rental invoices show what movies and TV productions they rented the inventory to, oftentimes showing which actor used which guns and leather. And sometimes the actors even went in and picked them up themselves at the armory.
Al's going to give us a tour of Stembridge guns a little later, but right now we're going to get back to some of these fine guns. I happen to know the pedigree on this one. And this is another gun that John Wayne used. What do they call that hammer?
That's a high-profile hammer.
High-profile hammer. And that was used for fanning. In the movie The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, when John Wayne shot the paint cans off the fence, he used this gun and used it in this manner, squeezing the trigger.
That's right. Matter of fact, Al wanted me to fan that gun, that very same gun, in Vengeance Trail. And I said, Al, you know, they really didn't do that much in the real Old West. And he said, come on, Phil, I'm trying to add a little Hollywood in here for the spaghetti Western fans. And I said, well, okay, but I draw the line at that ricochet sound.
Say, Al, what are these shotguns here?
Well, these are two of four, maybe six short-barreled shotguns that John Wayne rented for use in his movie Big Jake. You remember when he killed Richard Boone and half those other bad guys in the film? Well, these are two of the shotguns. As with what Phil said about multiples, they rented a bunch of them.
Wow.
And well, I think 3 or 4 different characters used short-barreled guns also in that picture.
Man.
But they functioned perfectly with shotgun blanks.
I'll be danged.
Oh, yeah.
These were his greeners.
Those were his greeners. Say, Buck, why don't you tell Phil and the folks that story about Marshall Dillon's 6-shooter?
This is really interesting, folks, because when we were filming Gunsmoke, one of the viewers wrote in and said, James Arness, Marshall Dillon has got plastic grips on his 6-shooter. And he was right. He did. So we had to change them. So we went back to Stembridge and got the real deal. Stag.
And that was about halfway through the 20-year run?
Yes, it was, Al. And you know something? The viewer is always right.
Oh, amen.
I noticed this gun rig you got here. Hollywood equipped its Western heroes with fancy gun leather like this. Do you all remember this required bit of gun rigging? Created by gun coach Arvo Ojala and used by almost every 50s and 60 cowboy actor. Hero, villain, Matt Dillon, Paladin, Cheyenne, Maverick, Festus, even me. We all used them. This was the first quick draw holster. Arvo devised a lining of steel sewn between the layers of leather, the top of the holster, It always kept its shape that way and allowed the gun to be cocked as it was being pulled. Remember when Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and all those B-Western heroes wore beautiful gun leathers like this? Well, Tom Mix got a feller by the name of Ed Boland, and he started making these fancy gun leathers, and pretty soon everybody was wearing a Boland rig. Boland even made saddles for many of our favorite stars, and you can see them every year at the Rose Parade on New Year's Day. Now, authentic holsters of the Western frontier period looked like this, not like Arvo or Boland. Frontier holsters were made to protect the gun from the elements. I think Glenn Ford would have been safe. Oh boy. What Clint Eastwood fan wouldn't recognize these two pieces of hand artillery from the movie Outlaw Josie Wales? Yes. These are Italian copies of the original type Colt 1847 Walker revolver, weighing in at about 5 pounds, just like an original. But unlike the originals, though, these guns have been adapted to shoot movie blanks. The thing I like about Clint Eastwood, he always uses a variety of different guns. And I know in Pale Rider, he used these Remingtons, which were period correct, great weapons.
Yeah, you know, the Remington, a lot of people erroneously call it the 1858 Remington, but it's actually the 1861 New Model Army is the real name for it. They started out as a cap and ball pistol, was one of the most popular guns of the Civil War period, and then after the Civil War, with the advent of the self-contained metallic cartridges, they started converting them for use with the new metallic cartridges. And Al, you can tell them a little bit how they make that work for the film industry.
Well, you know, I guess it was a unique gag for Clint to reload with this gun. And essentially what he did was he opened the lever, pulled the rod out, cocked it back a little, peeled it out, and then you remember he had an extra cylinder loaded on his belt. So he put that in, lined it up, and he was ready to kill more bad guys.
How do you all know so much about all this stuff?
Well, I made some of his gun leather for that film.
Oh, Phil made gun leather for a number of westerns, including Pale Rider, Josie Wales. In fact, there's a Phil holster from Josie Wales and a couple from here from Pale Rider.
Well, I'm impressed. In filmmaking, time is money. So filmmakers had to adapt or substitute various guns so they could be loaded or unloaded as quickly as possible. Al, tell us about the good old trapdoor carbine.
Hollywood is expert in the art of illusion, and they have been almost from the very beginning. For instance, they've adapted this, the 1873 Cavalry Trooper's carbine, and the infantry rifles to be other firearms. It was a single shot, 45-70 carbine, stuck the round in there, closed it, fired it. As soon as you open the action again, the empty brass casing popped out and you were ready to go again. So it lent itself to the movie business really well. It was reliable, strong. And of course, they adapted it into other things. Now, here's one of the other things. That's a Brown Bess musket. They changed the shape of the buttstock to give it a look from 150 years earlier. They added a brass flintlock hammer and a frizzen, and it worked exactly the same as the original carbine. So it was quick to reload, perfect, reliable for movies. And of course, then they needed other guns. So another fine specimen of the same basic gun, another gun used by John Wayne in the Alamo. Again, they changed the shape of the butt, added a brass patch box to it, a different hammer and frizzen, an octagon barrel, And it looks like a Kentucky rifle. And of course, it functions flawlessly with the movie blanks. It looked like the real thing. Now here's a really unique piece. They made blunderbusses, you know, like the coachman used when the highwaymen held them up in England. They wrapped the barrel with wire, added a bit of, looks like the end of a fire hose, another flint lock, changed the butt, cut it down, because the original wood came out to here. And it, of course, operated exactly the same. And this, a pirate pistol, a mountain man's pistol, some other kind of frontier pistol. With this pistol, they removed the original 45-70 barrel, you know, which was about 45/100ths of an inch in diameter, and they put in a piece of steel pipe with a bigger bore to make it look like a big flintlock pistol. Here's a good one. Do you remember Beau Geste, the Gary Cooper film of the 1930s? Well, here they made it into the same gun again, into an Arab desert tribesman's gun. Hundreds and hundreds were made up like this and used in any number of those Foreign Legion epics.
So Al, where did these prop houses like Stembridge acquire guns, gun-related gear, military uniforms? Where did they acquire all that?
Well, one of the places was Francis J. Bannerman's. Bannerman was essentially our first Army-Navy store. He began buying military surplus at the close of the Civil War, and from then on bought and sold military surplus for another 100 years, up into the 1960s. The formative years of the movie-making business, it was a great resource. They bought hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of cavalry saddles, sabers, holsters, guns, belts, carbines. A carbine like this at the turn of the century, or say by 1920, might cost $3. Now, if the studio bought 200 or 300, maybe they were $1 a piece. I really don't know, but they were dirt cheap in the catalogs of the time. Another item featured in their over 400-page catalog, Clint Eastwood's Pale Rider gun, one of them anyway, sold for $2.85 in 1920. Now worth $10,000 or $20,000 with the mystique of Clint Eastwood added in. Uniforms. Western Costume Company started buying their uniforms and then making them later. Here we are at the beginning of a 30-page section featuring surplus U.S. and foreign military uniforms. These first 2 pages feature U.S. uniforms of the Spanish-American War, 1898. And then we move through the next 30 and we come to page 257, Civil War uniforms and equipment. It's not hard to figure out where Hollywood costumers bought their military costuming, at least in the beginning, and then probably used originals as the basis for their own copies in later years.
When I first started in the movie industry, Phil, Al, we used original guns. That's all we had. And then the last 20 years or so, they started using replicas and reproductions and really good ones. How did that all come about?
There are dozens of companies that are importing the foreign-made replicas, and they're authentic copies of so many of the different guns used in the frontier. There's a great variety of guns that are used, so we use those because they're functional, they're in new condition, it's easy to get duplicates in case of malfunctions, and it just makes more sense because the originals are hard to find, and sometimes they're just worn out.
And they're very valuable in the best conditions. Yeah, I know that because I own a few of each.
Yeah.
In fact, you know, here's a good example of an original Colt single action, 100 and some years old, and there you have a 1 or 2 year old Uberti copy there imported by one of the 5 or 6 big importers in this country. Yeah. And they're dynamite. They are very nice. Perfect reproduction. Nobody can tell the difference unless they could read the small print.
Right. Yeah, you take a gun like this replica, you can work it all day long, you can do all the tricks that you need to do just like an original, yet you don't have to worry about the gun breaking and wearing out, and if it does, then you've got a duplicate of it just like that.
Right. And not only that, but at a fraction of the cost of the original.
Exactly.
Now here's another example. Here we have an engraved 1866 Winchester, and probably worth $10,000 minimum. And here we have a $600 copy from Italy, and they actually engrave them with the same engraving patterns over there if you want. An engraved one might be $1,000. And who would risk something like this? Well, number one, where would you find a duplicate to it? And who would risk it?
Yeah.
Same thing for multiples here. Here's an original Colt cartridge conversion, and here are Italian copies. And I know, well, shoot. There's an Italian copy that I'm holding, just like the one used by Sam Elliott in Conager, and there you have an original.
Of the 1873 Winchester. And one of the other advantages of a gun like this is that when you're depicting that period, you want the guns to look like they're new because they were new then. You wouldn't have a 100-year-old worn-out gun.
Well, that's quite true. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. It's, well, shoot. Here's a new copy of a Sharps carbine, you know, Texas Ranger type Sharps carbine, Civil War period, and it looks brand spanking new. And of course, you have a well-worn copy there. But, as you said, they are making dozens and dozens of different copies. We have Remington copies. I know when they first started importing the percussion firearms like these, some of the studios and armories converted them to shoot blanks, and it's a lot quicker to load them that way.
It's easier to train an actor to do that rather than take all the time necessary for going into the half-cock mode, bringing down the loading lever, pouring your powder in, going through the very timely process of loading each chamber separately, and then the timely process of capping each one. It was not only difficult for an actor to learn how to do that, it cost time and production money, and it was just a very lengthy procedure. But by taking a cap and ball Colt such as this 1851 Navy, which loads and operates in the same manner, by converting it to take a self-contained metallic cartridge, the studios were able to put a cartridge right in there, rotate that cylinder, move it around, and throw another cartridge in there, and now you're ready to go into action with a fully loaded gun, and as far as the camera can tell, it looks just like a cap and ball.
Well, here she is.
Oh yeah, that's it.
I call that my Ben gun. This was Ben Cartwright's gun on Bonanza. Those first few years, you know, the big silver C here, both sides of the stock. This is the one I nailed that pig with.
I know
One
it.
place.
You did.
Great little gun, 4440 carbine that they completely nickel plated.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a gun.
Guys, here's a gun that not only shares real Old West history, but a bit of silver screen history as well. An 1873 Springfield trapdoor carbine that by serial number is documented as having been in the John Wayne classic film, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. Now we recall the scenes where the cavalry was riding in over the sand dunes and the officer gave the call to shoot over the heads of the Indians. So not to,
I remember that. Yeah.
And then also the other classic scene where John Wayne, Ben Jonson, and Dobie Carey were watching the gun trader being executed by the Indians and tortured by the Indians. And it was a very stirring scene. And Ben Jonson was up there with his carbine at the ready should the need arise, but he didn't have to use it. But this is one of the carbines used in a classic scene from a classic film.
Man.
Yeah, it's a beaut.
Listen, I want to thank you fellers for sharing this experience with me. I'm not going to say goodbye, but I'll say so long and thank you.
Adios, Art.
Thank you, Al.
You bet.
This is Buck Taylor telling you so long for now. Be seeing you soon with some more Western movie history.